Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to talk about the 4 new uniforms from AntMan and the Wasp update. I want to give you my opinions on which ones I think are the best and why, how they change the character's skills around, and some gameplay to test out the differences in damage between these new uniforms and old uniforms or base kits in the form of Wasp. However, before we talk about that, I just want to address the concerns that I've seen from some members of the community that are unimpressed by these uniforms because none of them are as powerful or as kind of meta-defining as, for example, Winter Soldier's Infinity War uniform, or Scarlet Witch's, or maybe War Machine's. Not all uniforms are going to be that good, and I think it's not a good idea for the kind of longevity of updates to base every single uniform that we see from now on Winter Soldiers. Sometimes uniforms will be better, sometimes they'll be worse, but we should take them instead of as a comparison to all other uniforms as an individual uniform. So what does this uniform do specifically for this character? Because the characters are not going to necessarily interact with each other, but more often than not they're going to be interacting with NPCs and kind of just world bosses and Shadowland stages and the Frost Beast. So the PvP aspect is a very small side of things, and it shouldn't be the basis for comparison on which characters are just automatically better than others and which uniforms are automatically worthless because they don't bring as much value as Winter Soldier. I think Winter Soldier was an outlier. I don't think we're going to get another uniform like his for a long time, if ever, and I think that's okay. So I just wanted to make that point and send that across to you in case you were a little bit disappointed with these uniforms. I don't think any of them are, you know, blow you out of the water amazing, but I do think that they all buff these characters significantly, and I do think that they all make these characters better if you want to play with these characters in the first place. So jumping off, we're gonna go into Giant Man and his Pimtron uniform. This one is interesting because it offers a lot of flexibility and versatility for Shadowland. It gives you some valor if you tier 2 the character for World Boss Ultimate, and it has clones and it's got some really cool animations. You're going to see the biggest jump is in terms of his damage output. The survivability doesn't get addressed as much as you might have hoped because he does still only have 4 seconds of immunity. I believe with his old uniform it's 3 seconds of immunity on his 5th skill, and aside from that he only has some minor kind of effects. He doesn't have any guard or heals or stuff like that. He does, however, also give himself super armor all defense 20%, which is nice for not needing a guard break immunity obelisk if you play him manually. Additionally, because his summons can come around every 6.5 seconds if you have max skill cooldown, and because this skill actually does damage, unlike other uniforms or unlike other characters where you want to only summon the clones again when they're gone, like Loki or Clea, for this Ultron Pym, I would recommend spamming this skill as much as possible. I think it's his best skill besides Roaring Pym, and the damage it does, in addition to the clones, is actually very good on its own. But outside of 5 and 4, he doesn't seem to be as kind of explosive, so he might struggle a little bit as an autoplay character for something like Timeline or Alliance Conquest if you're not manually controlling the character. I'm going to show you guys some Shadowland footage here now. He does do quite a bit better with his uniform than without. He has much more AoE damage. He can kind of lock down the enemies with more ease. Giant Man, for whatever reason, just ends up doing a lot of 1 versus 1 dueling because he can't really group enemies. He knocks them away from each other, which kind of doesn't work very well in a rumble or in a stage where you have multiple enemies, or even in kind of a Frost Beast situation where you're attacking one larger minion with infinite health and then a bunch of smaller minions. Keep in mind that you're going to need this uniform at Mythic if you want to get the CTP selector from the legendary battle extreme mode. You do need to invest a total of 2,750 crystals to get it. It's going to be here, down here. It's 2,500 initially for the extreme mode, another 750 for the uniform, whatever you take to get it to Mythic, but then you do get a 500 crystal rebate by just playing these game modes and completing them with pretty standard, none too difficult challenges. So with that being said, and of course the CTP selector allows you to choose any CTP, I do think that this is an improvement for the character. I would say that without his uniform he was pretty much unplayable. He was like a 3, maybe a 3.5 out of 10. I think with this uniform he becomes a solid 5.5, a 6 out of 10, maybe even a 7. Again, not going to wow you or knock your socks off like a 10 out of 10 Winter Soldier, not going to compete for ABX lead with AntMan, but just a solid character fun to use, and pretty cool and pretty similar to what we see in the comics. The final thing I want to keep in mind for you guys, and I want to point out for you, is that he actually loses stats because he's a universal type versus a combat type when he puts on this uniform. So despite the fact that this one is heroic, and despite the fact that I have a physical attack buff of 337 in addition to the 16% all attack, whereas this one only has 10% all attack, you can see here that with this uniform he's got 21,200 physical attack, but when I swap to his old uniform, he's actually got more. He's got 21,400, almost 500. So it's just an interesting kind of negative, because the combat class has more base stats, especially for physical attack and HP, than the universal class does. However, as a universal type, he doesn't have a type disadvantage, which makes him much better for Shadowland on top of being a villain. So overall, I do like this uniform. Moving on to the next one, I'm going to talk about AntMan. I think this uniform is the standout buff uniform from the list of 4. I think that AntMan was basically so weak offensively with his old uniform that he couldn't do any kind of difficult content because he just can't put out enough damage fast enough. That was basically his problem. He could survive. Actually, it was hard for him to survive, but he could survive, but he just couldn't do enough damage. Now he does a lot more damage. Again, for AntMan, a lot of damage might not seem like a lot of damage to you, but for AntMan, it's a lot. I think his damage is at least tripled, possibly even more. And you can see from the Shadowland run that with this uniform and with a pretty aggressive rotation using my damage proc correctly, I was able to kill just Thor in 6 seconds, which I think is quite impressive. I won't spoil, or I won't force you to watch the entire clip, but with his old uniform, with a similar physical attack stat, I tried to even them out so they wouldn't be too far off from each other. He was clocking in at 42 seconds. So that's a huge gap, and yeah, it's 6 seconds to kill a stage 8 enemy might seem like a really long time and might not seem impressive. Absolutely, if you compare him to Jean Grey or, you know, Spider-Man tier 3 or something like that, it's not going to be too impressive. Maybe it will be when he gets his tier 3, but for AntMan, it is impressive. In terms of skill changes, he does get 4 out of 5 skills now being iframes, so he gets a huge survivability bump when he doesn't have his tier 2 passive available. It does still encourage you to build dodge as a stat for him because he doesn't get a lot of dodge otherwise, and he has no kind of normal dodge or guaranteed dodge. It's only when the tier 2 skill activates, so he is vulnerable when he's not iframing if he gets hit. He's also, of course, vulnerable if someone has ignore dodge. But it's a big change for him, and you know, he basically gets everything. He gets the damage, he gets the survivability. His 5th skill has a summon associated with it. His 4th skill, I can still hear people complaining about it, and kind of rightfully so. It's a very long animation. It's got a lot more hits now, but it's a very long animation. But his other skills are quite fun. He's got more debuffs now with the chance to miss, which is kind of like a dodge. And I do think this character is quite fun and entertaining to use. And his tier 3 skill will eventually be amazing. Moving on to the third one on the list, we have Wasp, and I do have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed with Wasp's uniform. The damage is just not enough for me to justify a 1000 crystal uniform in my eyes, and on top of it being a uniform that doesn't fit the character because it's Hope's uniform for Janet, I don't think enough was done to really bump the character. I wouldn't be surprised, and I would be pleasantly surprised actually, but I still wouldn't be surprised if this uniform got a buff in the near future to help the sales, because it's just really not enough of a change. The only honest change that I can see that's really going to be meaningful is the 5th skill. Now the shield, that bubble shield that gives her immunity, moves around with her. So you can move around to where your allies are and protect them and give them immunity. Of course, you still get penetrated by characters who can penetrate, but it's much better for Alliance Conquest, Shadowland Rumbles, and stages where you have 3 versus 3. It's not very useful for 1 versus 1. It's slightly more useful, but her damage is so low that she's still going to need a lot of help to get things done. Her 3-star skill that has a buff now also has a debuff to the opponent and a better buff with the all attack increase. She has some additional iframes. Her 4th skill does more damage, yes, but overall I just don't see a big difference, and the Shadowland numbers kind of show that. With the new uniform, and again a similar energy attack stat, I was clocking in at 38 seconds to kill these 2 guys, which is actually just Thor, which is a really long time if you compare that to AntMan. Without the uniform, she was clocking in at almost 50 seconds at 49, but still 38 seconds to clear a stage 8 character is just unacceptable for a tier 2 with, you know, a rare uniform. Just not enough. Really lacking a lot of the offensive tools that we would come to expect, and doesn't really justify the price point at this point, and doesn't even give you much from the extreme battle if you invest in it. So this one I'm a little bit I'm being a bit hard on it. Finally, I want to talk about the Ghost uniform, and this one's kind of interesting because the base model is quite strong, the non-uniform version of Ghost. The biggest change that you'll see with this uniform is partly good and partly bad. The good part is that with this uniform, the the tier 2 passive gets buffed, so instead of being villains, it's all allies, so you can use a Ghost with other allies that have a leadership that affects this technokinetic. So for example, you could use Ghost's leadership and AntMan because he has the machine typing. If you want to know who has technokinetic or who would apply with Ghost's leadership, you need to go over the details page, and at the bottom where it says abilities under the villain supervillain or the hero supervillain, you need to find the machine typing. Kingpin with the uniform, Maximus I believe, Ultron, Vision, Iron Man. I'm just throwing a couple out there to give you guys an idea. So without the uniform, it only affects, the tier 2 passive only affects villains, but with the uniform it will apply to all, and it's actually, instead of 10%, it's 20%. So you can be rocking up to 70% attack buffs using Ghost's leadership for someone like Iron Man. Is that really great? Good enough for a uniform? I'm not sure. The other effect that you're going to see, which is kind of negative, is that Ghost loses the mind control effect on the second skill. So the second skill here has shock damage and all defense down, which is fine, and it's a nice long iframe. However, a lot of people are going to miss the second skill effect, because if you've come to love Ebony Maw or you've come to love Scarlet Witch's new mind control, Ghost has it too, and it's a 3-second mind control on a 4-second cooldown when you have 50% skill cooldown. So you can basically spam 2 and 5 over and over and over again, and the enemy just can't do anything because you're gonna mind control them, and then for the 1 second that you're out of mind control, you'll be doing a long iframe 5th skill. The 5th skill is quite good. It groups enemies together, it crowd controls them, it does good AoE damage, it just has energy as well as lightning, so if you play against a lightning resistant stage like that Thor stage that I almost tested on, you won't do very much damage. But I am kind of both impressed by the base kit and the uniform. I don't think it's necessary. It's only if you want to use the character in more of a support role. I think Ghost without the uniform is just a good villain, probably a little bit better than Vulture. With the uniform, again, still a good villain, but good in different ways. Not as good one-on-one, I think, but better in a team setting, especially as a leadership role with kind of these support buffs to add extra damage to your teammates if you want multiple people to be working together to deal damage. The really other good thing about this uniform is that it's not gonna apply for Extreme Alliance battle, at least for now. So this wasn't necessarily a cash grab in that department. The buff that you get, or the reward that you get from Extreme Alliance from the Extreme Legendary Battle for having Ghost's Uniform Mythic is quite sad, so I wouldn't count on that one. From the Shadowland test that I did with this uniform on, I was clearing the first 2 enemies, Malekith and Bullseye, in about 13 seconds. Without the uniform, I was doing it about 20 seconds, but you may notice from the clear that it's quite a bit easy. It's almost easier to do it without the uniform because of how powerful that new 5th skill is. One tip that I have for you when using Ghost's new uniform, if you are getting it, don't ever not cancel the 5th skill. Never cast the 5th skill and just wait. Always cancel the 5th skill because you're going to get all of the effects anyways, the fear, the damage, the buff. Just automatically cancel 5 into another skill, and then once you get close to an enemy, you'll see that green bubble, and that'll be your kind of indicator that you're getting the damage off and that everything is going as planned. So those are my reviews, and those are my thoughts and all of my ideas and all of the kind of feeling that I had about these 4 uniforms. In general, I'm happy about these uniforms. I think that they represent the characters accurately, and I think that they buff them in a meaningful way, not necessarily just outright OP buffs, but kind of incrementally and in ways that make sense. And they almost make a couple of these characters feel like different characters, especially for the 2 villains, Pimtron and Ghost. But of course, let me know what you guys think of these uniforms. Let me know which ones you're getting, if any. Subscribe if you enjoy the content and you want to support me. Hit the bell if you don't want to miss any of my uploads. And of course, if you like what you see, I hope to see you again tomorrow. Take care.